about half of it. We can't watch it all because of the ratings because we're quite young, but we've watched.
Oh,
We've watched.
okay. All right. So, so you know me from the film then. You've seen me from the film. My name's Sam. And I started working for SeaWorld of Florida in January of 1990. So I was not quite 22 years old. And honestly, right now, you guys probably know more about killer whales in captivity than I did when I started working there. And I'm not even kidding about that. It's true. When I started working there, I had just graduated with a degree in animal science from Cornell University in the US. It's a really well-known school for veterinary sciences, so I was planning on being a veterinarian. And most part of the way through my schooling, I got a little bit disillusioned about going right to vet school, and I thought, well, what did I want to do when I was your age? You know, what was something that really interested me? And one of the things I had always wanted to do was be a dolphin trainer. So I looked at my resume, and I had most of the qualifications that I thought a place like SeaWorld would want. I was a really strong swimmer. I swam all through high school. I was a lifeguard. I was a swimming instructor. I had some stage experience. I had 4 years of an animal science degree, so a science degree. And I expected that I was going to a scientific institution that did research. That was my understanding of SeaWorld. When I got there, I found out it was more like a circus environment, as you guys probably saw. You showed them a video, you said, of some of the SeaWorld performances of the whales jumping up. Yeah. So you guys see how it's kind of like going to see a circus, but the company presents themselves as though they're an educational facility. And of course, at 22 years old, all I wanted to do was swim with the animals. So I didn't question a lot of what I was learning back then. And there was no internet. So if I wanted to learn more about the animals or their history, I would have had to go to the library. I had no reason not to believe what the company was telling me. So I thought it was a really fun job to do out of college. And when I left after 3.5 years, I'd had the chance to work with all of the animals that were at SeaWorld at the time, except for the birds. I'd worked with all the animals at the Whale and Dolphin Stadium, so the bottlenose dolphins, the beluga whales, false killer whales, even a Stenella dolphin. I worked with the walruses and the otters, and I spent a year at the killer whale stadium. And in the movie, I think you probably, I'm not sure how much you were able to see in the movie, but you know a little bit of the story about the whale Tilikum, who was responsible for the death of Don Brancho, right? So Dawn was hired 6 months after I left the company. So I left in 1993, and I was planning to go back. My plan was that I realized that as an animal trainer, I wasn't really able to make the difference in these animals' lives that I thought that I would be able to. But I wasn't totally disillusioned with the company at the time. I just thought, you know, I don't see training these animals to do tricks is really enriching their lives. So I thought I would go back to school and maybe get my veterinary degree or maybe get a degree in facility design. So, and then I could come back and use my behavioral knowledge to make the animal facilities better. I didn't really understand at the time that the reason the facilities are so barren is because they have to be that way or you really couldn't get the animals to perform shows. So, and so I ended up getting a little bit sidetracked, and right now I own an acupuncture center in Palmer, Alaska. So I ended up going back to acupuncture school, and mostly I talked about my experience at SeaWorld from a positive perspective. I still really didn't see everything that I see now because I just didn't look deeply into my experience there. It was something that I'd done in the past, and in some ways, I even mentioned it in the film, I was kind of proud of being a SeaWorld trainer because I thought that I was educating people like you guys. I did plenty of educational shows while I was there. I mean, I must have talked to, you know, hundreds of thousands of kids over the 3.5 years that I was there. I mean, millions of people come through that park. And so I thought that I'd done something really good. And then this woman in February of 2010 was killed by the whale Tilikum. And immediately after that happened, it started me on this road of questioning everything that I thought that I knew when I worked at the park. One of the things that I knew, first of all, about Tilikum is that he'd actually been responsible for killing 2 people before he killed Dawn. So I couldn't understand how this woman who'd had basically 16 years of experience could have been in the position where she could have got injured that way because the company must have known about, well, they knew about his history, and yet she was still allowed to get so close to this animal that he was able to pull her in the water. So, and I also knew that the level of experience that she had, that what she was doing on that day, had I gone back to the company like I planned, it easily could have been me in that position. So, so you can imagine what that feels like, thinking, wow, I was totally intending to go back and be, either as a veterinarian or facility design or in some capacity. And I thought, wow, that could have been me, because she knew more than I knew, and yet she got herself in that position with this animal. So what's going on there? And basically that started me down this path of questioning everything that I thought that I knew about killer whales in captivity. And I found out that I didn't know as much as I thought as I did. And I reconnected with some of my friends who I'd worked with in the 90s. And during that time, there was a journalist from Outside Magazine who wrote a story called Killer in the Pool. And he interviewed a couple of my friends that I'd worked with back in the 90s. And we started getting together. We had a group of journalists and former SeaWorld trainers and scientists and so-called animal activists. And we were all getting together and sharing information. And the more I learned, the more I realized is, like, I know nothing about killer whales. I only know about these animals that are living these barren lives in these tanks. I didn't even know, I thought that the animals were rescued when I worked there. I didn't realize that they'd all been captured from the wild. I didn't understand that the only reason they built Shamu Stadium was because they couldn't get, it was impossible for the babies to nurse with the moms because they were forced to swim these really tight circles in the smaller pools. So they actually built Shamu Stadium specifically because they were getting so much pressure from the public about collecting animals from the wild that they had to figure out a way to breed them in captivity. Otherwise, they would have kept them in smaller pools. They wouldn't have even spent the money for that. So a lot of different revelations came out, and then I started speaking out in public about what I knew, because unfortunately, even though this woman was killed and a lot of her coworkers were very upset, most people still working at the park and still working in the industry were very uncomfortable about saying anything about the company because they could potentially lose their jobs. And the animal training industry, especially with killer whales, there aren't that many job positions. So if you speak out about what you know from what you've seen behind the scenes, you're likely to lose your job and not be able to get hired anywhere else in the world. So I happen to be in a unique position that I never went back to the industry, but I knew a lot about what went on behind the scenes, and so did several of my former colleagues. So the four of us formed a group called Voice of the Orcas, and you can find us, we're a Google group, and we just started talking to whoever would listen. And in September of 2010, I ended up on Fox News, of all places, which I never thought I would be on, and they were asking me questions about whether or not I thought, if Dawn had had access to scuba gear, what they call spare air, if she would have been able to survive the attack. So that was really my first time going out in public, and it was kind of frightening. I remember I was taken to a TV studio at 4:30 in the morning, Alaska time, and in a basement with a really bored cameraman, and all of a sudden I was on live TV in front of 2 million people, and I had about 2 minutes, and then I remember leaving the TV studio thinking that the SeaWorld van was going to pull up and whisk me away because I'd actually spoken out in public about a large company. And in the end, I probably lost a few friends on Facebook, but I'm really glad that I came forward, and because of that, other people have come forward, and all this information has been able to get out there. And it's not just been, obviously, me. There's been so many people now who've come forward and spoken about their experience. And I think, but really the next wave is you guys, because people like you're making movies, you're talking about what you know, you're getting the information out to your friends and family. And I think that in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see the idea of keeping these large animals in captivity is just going to be just as awful as imagining slavery 100 years ago. It's just not going to make sense to anybody. So, you guys have some questions for me?
Yeah, we do. Caitlin, do you want to go and ask Sam a question? Go on there, Caitlin.
Do you miss the orcas that you work with?
Oh, say that again. A bit louder.
Do you miss the orcas in the park?
Sure, I miss all the animals. I mean, when you're an animal person, any animal that you've ever worked with, you kind of fall in love with them in a little way. But unfortunately, only 2 of the orcas that I worked with are still alive in captivity. The rest of them are dead. And if those animals had been in the wild, almost all of them would still be alive. So that just tells you a little bit about what life's like for them at SeaWorld. But yeah, I miss them all. And again, when I was there, I always felt like I had a different impression of what I was doing. And I thought of things from my perspective about how much I love the animals. But I don't think that they loved me enough to want to be swimming around in a small tank for the rest of their lives. But yeah, I definitely felt close to them when I was there.
Abby, come on.
How did you feel when you saw the baby whales being separated from the mothers?
It's pretty horrible. I actually worked there during a time when there were 2 baby whales there with their moms that hadn't been moved from their mothers, but I knew about the story about Kalina being taken away from her mom, Katina, and I only knew a little bit about it when I was there. And when I actually saw the whole story of what actually happened, because that happened while I was working at SeaWorld, a little bit before I was moved to Shamu Stadium, I cried. I mean, it's heartbreaking to see that. And to know that they do that on a regular basis when in the wild, you know, male killer whales, at least the southern resident population off the coast of Washington State and the San Juan Islands, they've been observed spending about 70% of their time within a couple of body lengths of their mothers. So, and then even the daughters are very close to their mothers for their entire lives. So to actually know and understand how close these animals are in the wild, and then see what they're doing when they take these animals, when they separate these animals, just because they're not getting along or it doesn't work for the show or they need another animal in another park. I mean, it's pretty horrible. And again, to me, it would be like same thing as taking a 4-year-old from their mom, a human 4-year-old. It's just wrong.
You might recognize Zubair from the poem.
Let me see.
There he is.
Oh, yep, I do. Hi.
If you knew what the orca said, what do you think they did say?
Well, I think they would say, "Get me out of here." I mean,
I think they would say, "Get me out of here."
I think that they're communicating that already. I mean, I think that every day the orcas are saying, "Get me out of here."
Every day.
You know, some of the animals adjust better to captivity, and some of them do live quite a bit of time in captivity. I'm thinking of animals like Corky at SeaWorld of Florida. She just, as of today, she just passed 45 years in captivity, so she's kind of an anomaly. And then there's Lolita at the Miami Seaquarium. I think she's at 44 years in captivity. And they have kind of become institutionalized. And do you guys know what that means when I say institutionalized? Does that word make sense?
Does that make sense?
No. Okay. All right. Well, just to so what that means is that they've got used to the program like a prisoner would get used to the routine in jail, but that doesn't really mean that they're happy. But I think the way that they express themselves is because they get aggressive with each other. They get sick very often because their immune systems are so stressed because of captivity, being in these tight spaces, and just even the fact that they don't live anywhere near as long in captivity as they do in the wild. I think that's communicating to us as well. So I don't think they actually need to speak for us to know at this point that it's not working out.
For us to know at this point that it's not working out.
Alicia? We've all got Christmas jumpers on today because it's Christmas jumper.
Oh, that's great. Well, I've got I don't know if you guys can see this. I've got my Slave World t-shirt. Can you see that? With the orca in jail? That's for you guys. I love the little flippers holding onto the bars.
Can you tell me if you blame Tillicum, the orca, for what he has done?
I don't blame Tillicum at all. I see this as you could see it as a 20-year train wreck or even a 50-year train wreck. When we decided to take these animals away from their natural environment and put them in this very unnatural environment, we were creating a situation where this was inevitable. It was going to happen. Somebody was going to get seriously injured or killed by an orca. And honestly, I mean, 2 people, again, he'd already killed 2 people, so it's not surprising that he killed a 3rd person. So I don't hold him responsible. The people I hold responsible are the people who chose to take him from the wild in the first place, and I hold SeaWorld responsible for, since he'd already killed 2 people, the fact that they allowed him to interact with people as close as they did, that should have never happened. It should have never been allowed. At the point after the 2nd person was killed, they should have figured it out and figured a way to make him safe so that it would never happen again. And they could have done it. It was totally within the realm of possibility, but they didn't deal with it, and then a 3rd person died. And unfortunately, it had to take 3 human lives. Actually, 4 people have now been killed by orcas in captivity. So that's pretty horrible that this only started getting out there after the 4th person was killed. But no, I don't see it as being Tillicum's fault at all.
But no, I don't see it as being silicon's fault at all.
Do you think that any SeaWorld would ever get shut down for their lies and horrible things they have done to these orcas?
That's an interesting question, and I personally don't want to see them get shut down. There are some things happening right now. I'm not sure if you guys are aware because it just came out in the news. It was this morning here, the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer of SeaWorld is stepping down. It looks like he's been forced to step down, although he's getting a pretty nice severance package that is equivalent to somewhere between 2.5 and $3.9 million US. So he's not going to be hurting. And they are going to be laying off quite a few people. So the movie has put some pressure on the company. They've lost about 40% of their value at this point. But to the question of whether they should shut down, I don't think so, because they have the potential to use their powers for good. They have the vets who know how to take care of these animals. They have the facilities. They could turn themselves into a rehab facility for animals that are actually injured and can't go back into the wild, and they could be a real research facility. And they could do real education too. So I think that with the knowledge that they do have, it would be a shame to waste it. And if they did shut down, it would be worse for the animals. Right now, they could turn them. They could actually find a way to move the animals into a what I'd call a sea pen situation, where they have access to the wild. It would be like a cove with a pen, where even the animals that can't get back out into the ocean because they were born in captivity would still have something more of a natural life, and they wouldn't be forced to do tricks for fish, basically. But yeah, I think there's an intermediate level. They don't need to be shut down, but there are some facilities out there that are way worse than SeaWorld. Unfortunately, SeaWorld is probably one of the top facilities in the world, if not the top facility. There are other facilities that are so run down and so poorly run and so dangerous that they do need to be shut down. So I think that needs to be looked at on an individual basis.
I think that needs to be looked at on an individual basis.
Right, which is a really next question, Drew.
These are great questions, by the way. You guys are doing awesome.
These are great questions, by the way. You guys are doing awesome.
Do you think there is a good side to captivity?
That's a great question, and I do think that in the case of killer whales, 50 years ago when these animals were captured, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what a killer whale was. Did you guys talk about the name of killer whale, about how that name came about, why they're called killer whales?
About how that name came about, why they're called killer whales?
No, not really. So these animals were observed in the wild killing other whales. So, and they were given a name in Spanish, which meant whale killer. So when it was translated from Spanish to English, it was flipped to become killer whale. But so a lot of people thought of them as basically sharks, and fishermen saw them as in competition with them for food. And the Navy would even use them for target practice because they didn't understand how intelligent the animals were, and they didn't understand anything about their social structures. And so people actually, I think, feared them before they were seen in captivity back in the 60s. Having said that, after a short period of time, it became very clear there were a number of researchers who started putting out papers, and there were people talking about it, and the information did get out to the public. And unfortunately, because these animals are so intelligent and so trainable, people realized they could make money off of keeping them in captivity, and more money started to be made, so it was turned into a business. And at this point, I don't think there's any benefit for the animals or for people having in captivity. But I do think early on that given the misunderstanding that people had about killer whales, I think it maybe served some purpose. But at this point, we know enough to know that these animals don't thrive in captivity and that it's actually bad for them. So I would say not anymore.
It's actually bad for them. So I would say not anymore.
You might recognize the scene as well. He's one of our poets. Here he is.
Yes, I do. You guys are all YouTube movie stars.
You guys are all YouTube movie stars.
What will you do to stop the terrible things that SeaWorld are doing?
What will I do? I'm going to keep talking because that's what I do really well. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much what I can do is get the word out. Again, it's kind of up to you guys what you're doing right now, writing to your MEPs. And you're going to go to Brussels, is that right?
Writing to your MEPs. You're going to go to Brussels, is that right?
Yeah, you're going to be going to Brussels to meet with the MEPs? Yeah. So I think it's...
With MEPs, yeah.
So talking to as many people as you can. Again, talking to your friends, talking to your family, getting the word out, getting people to watch the movie, getting people to read as much as they can. That's what I do. Is I talk. And I make myself available for classrooms like this, and anybody who wants me to Skype into a question and answer session after the movie. I just talk about what I know, and then I let people make up their own mind. And I think that the information speaks for itself. It's not something that I really have to convince anybody of. Once they see the facts, it's pretty obvious that that captivity is wrong.
Pretty obvious that captivity is wrong.
It's another one of our YouTube stars. Owen.
I love the sweaters.
We're going to write to our
I love the sweaters.
We're gonna write to our MEPs about this problem. What do you think about this, and do you think it's a good idea?
Oh yeah, definitely. And when I was in Brussels in March, and we met with a couple of MEPs, and they were very receptive to talking about ending captivity. In the UK, you don't have any captive dolphins anymore, and you don't have any captive orca. But in the EU as a whole, you do still have orcas in captivity and dolphins in captivity. I know it's over 300 dolphins. I don't know how many orcas right now, including the ones at Marineland Antibes and then also Laura Parque. I can't remember. It's maybe around 10. I'm not sure what the number is. But I definitely think talking to the MEPs is an excellent idea, and everyone that I spoke to when I was in Brussels and also in Strasbourg, they were very receptive. And because you're their constituents, they'll listen to you more than they'll listen to me, because I don't live there, so they want to hear what you have to say.
I live there, so they want to hear what you have to say.
Right, Sam. Thank you for taking time out of your evening, because I know it's late there.
Oh,
it's
sure.
Really nice to speak to you.
Yep, you guys too.
We're very passionate, but we're going to write about. We're not stopping.
Great.
Keep writing. We're going to send lots and lots of letters
Okay.
to the MEPs and make sure they're heroes. You see.
Yeah.
I think it's really powerful coming from young children that if they can understand the facts and then they can look at both sides and they can make a judgment, then surely educated people should be able to do the same thing. That's the kind of angle that we're looking at.
Absolutely, and along the lines of what you just said, I mean, I think that most kids, if they're not taught that captivity is okay, most people would go and they'd see these large animals in a small space and say that's wrong. But then we've in the U.S. at least, I can't speak for the U.K., we've been brainwashed that this is entertainment and that this is education. But when you just look behind the scenes and you see the truth of what's going on, like you said, it's very obvious. And so, it's kids who ask their parents to go to SeaWorld and say, Mom, Dad, we want to go to SeaWorld because it's fun. But if you're saying to your parents, I don't want to go there because it's wrong, well, then your parents aren't going to go. And so, again, you guys are the generation that's going to change it. So I'm behind you guys, and whatever I can do to help you, I'm happy to do it. So keep on doing what you're doing, and I'm looking forward to some more videos.
So keep on doing what you're doing, and I'm looking forward to some more videos.
Right, I'm going to say one last thank you, but yeah, we say thank you to Sam for taking time.
Thank you, guys.
Right, let's wait, bye-bye.
Okay. Bye. Have a great night. Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a great night. Bye-bye.
You too.